He was one of the most feared American soldiers who served his country with dedication. But once he returned his hometown, he was humiliated and belittled by his former friend, who was now a mafia boss of big drug cartel. He remained patient, but they attacked his family and assaulted his woman, unaware they have awakened the sleeping hunter. So, on that day, he left his room with a single goal, and that was destruction of evil mafia.
Listen to me. If you go out of here with that gun, they're gonna never...
Welcome back to Paramount Recaps. I don't have many subscribers, but your single comment is a ray of hope to motivate me.
You're fired.
The story kicks off with Chris Vaughn, who's just come back to his small hometown in Kitsap County, Washington, after serving in the Special Forces. On his way back, Chris notices that the old mill, which used to be the lifeline of the town, is now shut down. As he's checking out the closure notice, the local sheriff, Stan Watkins, rolls up and recognizes him. Watkins knows about Chris's military background and offers him a ride home. Chris isn't too keen at first, but eventually hops in because Watkins won't take no for an answer. When Chris gets home, he's greeted by his sister Michelle, and soon after, his parents come out to welcome him too. It's been years since they've seen him, and his nephew Pete has grown up a lot in the meantime. The next morning, Chris is busy fixing the wooden steps at the front of the house when his old high school buddy Ray shows up. They catch up, and when Chris offers Ray a beer, Ray admits he's been clean from drugs and alcohol for over a year now. Ray then invites Chris to join some of their old high school friends for a football game, and Chris is down for it. So, Chris and Ray head to the field and meet up with their crew. They're playing against a team led by Jay Hamilton, who's also an old friend of Chris. Jay's from one of the wealthiest families in the area and now owns the biggest casino in town. The game kicks off, but it gets rough quickly because Jay's team isn't playing fair, they're all about playing dirty. While the game's going on, Chris spots his nephew Pete hanging out with some kids who are smoking weed. Things get intense when one of Jay's main guys, Booth, tackles Chris hard, messing up his knee. But Chris decides to let it go, and the game wraps up. Before they head out, Jay invites Chris and the gang to his casino later that night. Later, Chris calls Pete and warns him to stay away from his stoner friends. But Pete just brushes him off and speeds away on his mini bike. That night, Chris, Ray, and some of their friends roll up to Jay's casino. As soon as they walk in, they're surprised by what they see. There are hot girls everywhere, keeping the customers entertained. Jay wastes no time giving Chris the VIP treatment, and soon, Chris is escorted to one of the exclusive dancing booths in the casino. He's left alone to watch a stripper do her thing, but after a few minutes, Chris realizes the dancer is none other than his high school crush, Denny. When Denny recognizes Chris, she stops her routine and closes the booth's shutters. Chris is pretty bummed to see her working as a stripper, so he heads back to the casino floor, where he finds Ray playing a random game. Chris then spots an old friend, Smitty, who's deep into gambling at a dice table. As Chris watches, he notices the dealer is cheating using loaded dice. Chris isn't about to let that slide, so he confronts the dealer. But things get heated quickly, and the dealer calls in security. A fight breaks out between Chris and the casino bouncers. At first, Chris holds his own, but soon enough, he's overpowered by 3 bouncers who tase him and drag him down to the basement. Down there, Booth, the head of casino security, takes Chris's special forces locket and starts cutting him up with a knife. After they're done torturing him, they dump Chris on the side of the road, assuming he's dead. But Chris, tough as nails, wakes up and manages to flag down a passing truck for help. Next thing we know, Chris is in the hospital, beat up pretty bad, but the doctors patch him up and let his family know he's going to be okay. Once he's back home, Chris spends time recovering, with Ray and Pete hanging around to help out. Pete even steps up to help Chris with his exercises and cooks for him. Slowly but surely, Chris starts to get back on his feet and into his routine. One day, while he's fixing up the old staircase again, Jay Hamilton shows up at his house. Jay tries to smooth things over, apologizing for what his men did to Chris. He even offers Chris a job as the head of security at his casino, but Chris politely turns him down. Jay pushes Chris to reconsider, but Chris stands firm, saying his decision is final. Then Jay tries to hand Chris some money as a way of making things right, but Chris isn't having it. Instead, he tells Jay he's planning to file a report against the casino. Chris then goes to the local sheriff, Watkins, to report what happened, but Watkins hits him with some bad news. The case has already been looked into, and there's not enough evidence to go after Jay's security guards or shut down the casino. Watkins explains that ever since the mill closed, the casino has become the town's main source of income, so shutting it down or punishing Jay is out of the question. Frustrated, Chris storms out of the station, but not before before telling Watkins that he's going to expose all the shady stuff happening at the casino. The next day, after meeting up with Denny, Chris returns home to a shocking sight. Pete has overdosed on drugs. Turns out, Pete got his hands on some crystal meth, a rare and expensive drug. When Chris tracks down Pete's friends and grills them about where they got the drugs, they spill that the casino security guards have been secretly supplying it and selling it all over town. Furious, Chris goes back home, grabs his old shotgun, and heads straight for the casino, ignoring his dad's pleas to stop. When Chris gets to the casino, he's fuming, but he keeps it together just enough to ditch the shotgun and grab a wooden log instead. He marches inside and starts wrecking the place, smashing up the slot machines and tearing up the casino's interior. It doesn't take long for Jay's guards to show up and attack him, but Chris is ready. He fights them off with a log, breaking bones left and right. He even beats up Booth and takes back his locket before throwing his wooden log through a mirrored window, where he sees Jay watching the chaos unfold. But just as Chris tries to make his getaway, the cops surround him, and Watkins steps in to arrest him for assaulting the guards and trashing the casino. So, the next part of the story takes us to the police station, where Chris is talking to a lawyer, trying to get him to take his case. When the court hearing rolls around, Hamilton brings in a bunch of witnesses from his casino, and they all gang up on Chris. They paint him as this highly trained army guy who just went off the rails that day. But here's the kicker: Chris's lawyer doesn't say a word in his defense, which makes Chris suspicious. He starts thinking maybe the lawyer's in Hamilton's pocket too. Fed up, Chris fires the lawyer right there in court and asks the judge if he can handle his case himself. The judge gives him the green light. With the floor to himself, Chris starts telling the jury and everyone in the courtroom about the shady stuff going on at Hamilton's casino, how they're dealing drugs and ripping off customers. He also drops a bombshell by announcing he's going to run for sheriff and promises to clean up the town, get rid of all the corruption. To drive his point home, he shows the jury the scars and wounds Booth left on him. All of this hits hard, and the jury sides with Chris, letting him walk out of there a free man. Fast forward a bit, and Chris has won the election and is now the new sheriff in town. On his first day on the job, the old sheriff, Watkins, comes by and suggests Chris keep the current deputies because they're supposedly trustworthy. But Chris, knowing they're all crooked, fires them on the spot and walks into the station alone. Later on, he runs into Hamilton, who's cruising around in his Porsche with his girlfriend. Chris stops him and asks for his license and registration, but Hamilton just laughs at him and even tries to bribe him. Chris isn't having it though, and before he leaves, he smashes one of the car's taillights and tells Hamilton to get it fixed. After that, Chris heads over to see Ray and asks him to join the police force as a deputy. Ray's hesitant at first, but Chris tells him he needs his help to bring down Hamilton's drug operation. Hearing this, Ray agrees to join the team. Soon enough, Chris and Ray are out there busting drug dealers left and right. They eventually catch Booth, and to get back at him, they start tearing apart his tricked-out pickup truck looking for drugs. When they're done, they toss Booth in jail. Back at the station, Chris tells Ray to head home and watch over his family because he knows Hamilton's likely to go after them. Meanwhile, Chris stays behind at the sheriff's office to keep an eye on Booth. That night, while Chris is having dinner, Denny shows up to see him. She tells him she's quit her job as a dancer at the casino. Chris is clearly happy to hear that, so he kisses her, and they end up spending the night together at the station. The next morning, Hamilton realizes Booth isn't at the casino, so he orders his goons to attack Chris's family and the police station. Soon, Hamilton's thugs show up outside the station and blow up Chris's truck. Then they start spraying the station with bullets from their machine guns. Shockingly, the shooters are none other than Watkins and the deputies Chris had fired. At first, Booth is thrilled to see Watkins, thinking he's about to be saved, but then he realizes just how bad things are and starts begging Chris to let him out of his cell. Chris uses this to his advantage, pressuring Booth to spill the beans about Hamilton's drug operation. With no other option, Booth confesses that the drugs are being made at the old mill. But before Chris can release him, Booth gets gunned down. With Denny's help, Chris takes out all the attackers, including Watkins. After the dust settles, Chris rushes home, where Ray and his dad have already handled the goons sent to attack them. Once he's sure his family is safe, Chris heads over to the old timber mill. There, he finds a meth lab and, of course, Hamilton, who's been waiting for him. Hamilton tries to get rid of Chris by dropping him through a trapdoor into some nasty mill machinery. But Chris pulls Hamilton down with him, and they both end up sliding into some kind of chute. Even though Chris's leg is messed up, he makes a run for it into the nearby forest, with Hamilton chasing after him, swinging an axe. Just as Hamilton's about to strike, Chris snaps his dislocated leg bone back into place and grabs a tree log to defend himself. Despite being injured, Chris overpowers Hamilton and beats him in the fight. Then, Chris arrests him and locks him up. The movie wraps up with Chris shutting down Hamilton's illegal casino and reopening the old timber mill, bringing jobs back to the town. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up It really helps the channel out. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below with your suggestions for future videos, any questions you have, or just to say hi. Your feedback is super important to us and helps us create better content for you. Also, feel free to share this video with your friends, family, and on social media. It really makes a big difference and helps our community grow. You can follow us on Insert your social media handles for more updates and behind-the-scenes content. Thanks again for your support, and we'll see you in the next video.